All right, we're going to be in Ruth chapter 3 this morning. Ruth chapter 3. Lou, I told you to take this with you. I can't keep it out of my feet. All right. Anyway, Luke chapter 3. How many of you, no, I won't ask because you probably don't want the world to know. So I won't ask for a show of hands. But one of the things that's become popular in our world today, especially as we hear about all the good news and all of the good people that populate our world, is home security systems have become something that people want to have. You know, a good home security system is something that you set up, and it monitors your house, and it pays attention even when you can't. So say you happen to be at night and sleeping, which is kind of a good thing to do at night. We generally, recommend to try to do that. And somebody tries to, crawl in one of your windows. If they're good and they're quiet, you won't hear it, but your alarm system will know they're there. Say if during said night you happen to be sleeping and you forgot to turn something off and it catches on fire, you won't necessarily know there's a fire, but your home security system does, and it can alert you, and more importantly, it can alert the authorities. In our end of the neck of the woods, that's good because response times for the fire department to this end of town is about 10 minutes, and that's just because they're that far away. There's not because they're slow, it's because they're further away. So these kinds of things are important, and I know a lot of people are going that direction because we feel less secure than ever. And so it's we sit here in Renton, we sit here in Sheldonville, and we're very semi-rural, like right here. But in about 10 minutes, you can be in a lot of different places. 10 minutes from right now, you could be in the center of Rentham, you could be in Foxborough, you could be in Franklin, you could be in Plainville, you could be in Woonsocket. And herein lies the problem. We're not that far from anything. And so, that gives us pause when we stop to think about it. And so we either get a security system or we just don't stop to think about it. I guess either works unless you actually have a problem, and then the security system is probably better. But security systems generally come with a few requirements that you absolutely have to follow. And these are not like, strenuous things. They're basic things. Like in order for a security system to work in your house, just hang with me here, you must first buy one. And you probably have to have it installed, because sitting in a box somewhere is not the most helpful way to have that, right? So, these are real basic rules, but they are rules. If you don't buy it, it doesn't work. If you don't install it, it doesn't work. You probably have to subscribe to some form of monitoring service, because if nobody's paying attention to what's going on at the other end, it's not very helpful. And so you have to pay for a monitoring service. You have to turn it on. Even if it's installed and monitored, if you don't actually turn it on, it's not going to help you. And you have to remember to set it when you walk in and walk out of your house. So you have your code and your whole thing, depending on how OCD you are. Maybe you get a retinal scanner or whatever you have. But you have to remember to set it when you leave the house. You have to remember to set it at night. You have to remember to turn it off when you come in, and you're going to be walking around because you don't want to send all kinds of false alarms. And so you have to set it and turn it on periodically. And then you have to maintain it periodically. If it's wireless, you have to make sure the batteries are working. If it's wired, you got to test it, make sure it's working. All those kinds of things have to happen. If you do all of these things, you can reasonably trust your system. Who in the world's calling me this hour of the day? You can reasonably trust your security system to keep you safe, or at least safer. I don't know that we can get all the way to safe, but we'll go for safer. But you have to do the things that the security system requires you. If you do not do these things, your security system will not keep you safe, cannot keep you safe. The reason that many people do not do them, especially that buy and install bit, is because they don't really trust that a security system is really going to help keep them safe in the first thing. So you look at it, you do a cost basis analysis, and you say, can I afford it? Is it really that trustworthy? Is it going to help me? For a lot of people, that answer still is no. Like, I don't think it's going to keep me safe enough to warrant the extra expense of going out and buying and doing all of these things. And so we look at it and we simply don't trust it. And so we don't do the things that we have to do in order to keep it working. Would it keep us safe? Would it not? That's a question you have to wrestle with yourself. But there is an absolute correlation between what we trust and what we do. If you sincerely and earnestly believed that a home security system was going to keep you safer, then you would find a way, make a way to buy it. We tend to have enough money for the things that we absolutely believe we must have. And so if we believed, really earnestly believed, that it would keep us safer, we would do something about it. There's an absolute correlation between what we trust and what we do. It's a part of our everyday life, and it's something that we actually see in the book of Ruth, and it plays out in Ruth chapter 3, and it gives us some very practical applications. But let's start Ruth chapter 3. Naomi has a desire for a security. So just to summarize where we are to date, we're about halfway through the book. Elimelech, a guy named Elimelech, lived in a place called Bethlehem. He had two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. I didn't name them, he did, so you can go ahead and laugh. And so he had these two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and he had a wife named Naomi. Bethlehem was enduring a time of famine, and so Elimelech had this great idea: let's move from Bethlehem, the house of bread, to Moab, because we've heard that there's water there, we might be able to grow some stuff there. And so he uproots his whole family, and they move to another country. And while they're there, Elimelech, right after they get there, soon after they get there, Elimelech up and dies. And so now Naomi is a widow. Mahlon and Chilion are pressed with this decision: should we go back to Bethlehem? Should we stay here in Moab? They decide to stay in Moab. They get married. They marry two women named Ruth and Orpah. You say, which one married which? The Bible doesn't tell us. Frankly, it doesn't even matter, because Mahlon and Chilion, soon after they got married, guess what they did? They up and died too. And so it's a very happy Disney movie at this point. And so Naomi, after a period of about 10 years, all this is going on, Naomi decides, hey, I've heard that there is food in Bethlehem, and so I'm going to move back to Bethlehem. And so her daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, come with her. They approach the border of Moab, and Naomi says to her daughters-in-law, you need to go home. She's finally able to persuade Orpah to return home, but Ruth is dead set on going with her, on becoming an Israelite by choice. And so she decides that she's going to become a citizen by choice. She's going to, Naomi's people are going to be her people. Naomi's God is going to be her God. She's just going, and she says, Mom, drop it. And so they, go the rest of the way. They don't bring that up again. So they get to Bethlehem, and indeed, there is food there. Ruth goes out into the field to begin gleaning what she can after the reapers have gone through, to try to get enough food that they can sustain life. She gets to this field of a guy named Boaz, who is a wealthy landowner, and Boaz notices her immediately, and Boaz takes kind of a liking to her. As far as she knows, Boaz is just a nice guy. Boaz starts taking care of her, starts leaving extra food behind in the field for her, and things are going really well. She gets home from this first day of work, and she tells her mother-in-law that she was in the field with some guy named Boaz. And Naomi goes, hey, I know Boaz, he's a relative. And so that's kind of where we pick up into chapter 3. So Naomi knows that Boaz is a relative, and Naomi has a desire for security. And so there's your Roman numeral 1 for you kids that are keeping notes there. Naomi has a desire for security. And we see this in Ruth chapter 3, verse 1. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you? And so she says, look, I think I should seek security for you. Now this is kind of a two-way thing, because she wanted security for Ruth, and yet she knew that her own security was tied up in Ruth's. Ruth had already vowed to take care of her mother-in-law. Ruth had already demonstrated that she would take care of her mother-in-law. And so Naomi's desire for security wasn't self-serving, but it was definitely a two-way street. She understood that if Ruth was cared for, and she had kind of a motherly instinct to care for Ruth, but she also knew that if Ruth was cared for, that she herself would have security as well. And so she unveils to Ruth this plan that she has for security. So there's your number 2, guys. Naomi's plan for security. And we find this beginning in verse 2, and it actually goes all the way down to verse 15. But she begins by explaining her plan to Ruth. And she says this in verse 2. Now, Boaz, whose young women you were with, is he not our relative? In fact, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Now, how many of you know how to winnow barley? How many of you even understand what those two words mean together? Winnowing barley. So barley, when you harvest it and you get rid of all of the stalks and stuff, there is still a lot of, you have the actual grain of barley, and then you also have a bunch of organic material that's left over from the plant that they call chaff, for lack of a better word. It's just the junk you don't want. And so they have to have a process of getting rid of this chaff. And so the way they did it back then was very high tech. You grabbed some barley in a bowl and you threw it up in the air. And what would happen is the chaff, after it's dried, is this real light flaky stuff, and even the slightest breeze kind of pushes the chaff, but the grain, because it's heavier, falls straight down. And so this is how they winnow. They literally throw stuff up in the air, and what comes down, they bag. And the breeze just keeps the chaff kind of moving along. Now, the nights are actually the advantageous time for doing this because you get more air movement, you get more wind, as stuff cools and all of that. You can go talk to your science teachers about how and why. But you get a better breeze going at night in that area especially. And so they would do it at night because you get more wind, and more wind means less work because it blows more chaff. We get cleaner germ, and boom, we're good. And so this is the process that's going on there. And so she says, look, Boaz is going to be winnowing barley tonight. So here's the plan, verse 3. Therefore, wash yourself and anoint yourself, put on your best garment, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Then it shall be when he lies down that you shall notice the place where he lies. And you shall go in, uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what you should do. Now, is anybody on the surface going, wow, that's kind of a weird plan? So let's break this down a little bit because it is a little bit a strange plan, especially to our ears. First of all, notice that Naomi's plan is actually God's plan. And so, we think it foreign, we think it weird, but this is God's plan. We talked a couple weeks ago about God's plan that when a man died childless, that his younger brother, would marry his wife and he would raise up a child, a son for him. And it was God's plan to extend, to keep going a man's line and legacy. And so this was God's plan. Now, what would happen is that this plan then extended out to other male relatives. It wasn't always possible that a guy's brother could go on. What if all your brothers are already married? Then you got a problem. And so this plan then extended, and there was a whole balance, way that it went, and it would extend out to other male relatives, all with the same purpose, though, of raising up a son for or to that man. This relative, whoever it would be, whether it was a brother or a more distant relative that would come in, was a guy called the kinsman redeemer. And that was the title that was kind of given to him. One other place, it's, he was the avenger of blood. Same role, same guy, different role, because, he was also the Gestapo if your family needed one of them. But in this particular instance, he was the kinsman redeemer. He was the guy who would come in and redeem the woman and raise up a son to his family member, whoever it would be. And we'll talk about that in a little greater detail next week. But that was the role that was there. The right and the role of the redeemer had an order within the family that it had to proceed in, and that's going to become very important as we keep reading here. But that's the principle, and that's what Naomi is rolling out as her plan for security. It sounds foreign to us, but to an Israelite, this is actually not at all foreign. This is part of their culture. This is part of what would be considered normal in there. But this would have been foreign, not just to us. This would have been foreign to Ruth as well. I mean, this is not how the Moabites rolled at all. And so Naomi is taking the time to explain what would have been a very foreign concept to Ruth, probably something that, under normal circumstances, a Moabite, just like an American, would go, wow, that's weird. I don't think so. Because ladies, how many of you want to marry your husband's anybody? We have enough family issues in this room to drive a therapist about the suicide. And so, it's just not something that most women in this room would consider. And I don't blame you because, gentlemen, we could agree most of our family members, especially our brothers, you get the cousins, but they're idiots. And that's the nice way to say it. And so to us, this is like, wow, this is crazy talk. And to Ruth, it would have been crazy talk, and it required some explanation, even though it was perfectly normal in Israel. God's plan required some trust to accomplish it. In order for this to work right, a woman would really have to trust that God knew what he was doing because it didn't look like it on the surface, at least from our cultural perspective. It's like God went crazy, and this is just crazy talk. So it requires a bit of trust to accomplish God's plan. And so, Naomi explains it. And the good news for Naomi, especially, is that Ruth actually accepts Naomi's plan. She exhibits the kind of trust that says, if this is God's plan, then fine. You may not know the guy. He may have BO. He may have a bad temper. He may have a lot of problems. He may not be young. He may not be attractive. You get where this is going, right? I mean, there's some serious trust issues that you're going to have to check in order to make this happen. But Ruth says in verse 5, all that you say to me, I will do. Whether or not this made sense to Ruth, we don't even know. But she says, if that's the plan, then I will do it. She trusted Naomi. She trusted God enough to say, if that's the plan, then that's what I'll do. And so Ruth actually carries out this plan, and we see it in verse 6. So she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law instructed her. And after Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was cheerful, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain, and she came softly and uncovered his feet and laid down. Now is that part weird to you still? That she was uncovered his feet? Like, why would you go up to a guy and and don't let your dirty mind go dirty, because there's nothing dirty here going on. Other than his feet probably stunk, but anyway. There's nothing unbecoming here. She simply took the blanket off of his feet. Is that weird to you? Anybody? You're like, what in the world? Here's the deal. How many of you have ever slept before? Okay. How many of you use a blanket when you sleep? How many of you, and I'll raise my hand first just to know this is normal in my life, how many of you sleep with at least 1 foot out of the blanket? Good. A lot of us do. Look at it. You're in good company. Why do you do that? Regulate your body temperature. That's why you do it, whether you know it or not. That's what it's more comfortable, I think, too. But it helps to regulate your body temperature. When I'm warm, I stick out that foot, and it helps me to cool off. If I get cold, I bring that thing right back in, don't you? If I get really hot, I put both of them out. Trying to regulate our body temperature with our feet. Now, imagine you're sleeping outside. It's a bit breezy. It's a bit cool at night. You think the Middle East, you look sometimes, you see the pictures coming back from the Middle East, and during the daytime, it's like hot as Hades, right? People running around just like sweat oozing and dripping and everywhere off. At night, everybody's running around in coats because the temperature differential is huge. The sun goes down, and it's like turn on the fridge, and it gets seriously cold. So you're laying there, and you've been working all day, you've had a good meal, you worked late into the night, you're staying at the office. Boaz has a house in Bethlehem, but he's out now in the fields because he's out winnowing, so he's sleeping at the office. Some of you could probably relate to that. And he's out there, and he's sleeping with a blanket, and all of a sudden his feet are uncovered. What's going to happen eventually? His toes are going to get cold. What happens then? What happens when your feet get cold? You wake up. Right, I know some of you are really overthinking this. but you wake up. That's the whole point of this. It's just to eventually, he's going to wake up. And this is exactly what happens. Verse 8. Now it happened at midnight that the man was startled. Now, the word that's translated here, startled, means physically to tremble, And it can mean being startled. It can also mean shiver. It is acceptable. And I think in this particular instance, you probably get a little bit of both. He gets cold because his feet are uncovered. He wakes up a little cold, a little shivery. And as he opens his eyes, there's somebody laying there staring at him. Freaky! And then he jumped because he was startled. So first he shivered and then he jumped. And both make perfect sense, don't they? You ever been sleeping and woke up and, had somebody like staring at you? Even if it's your cat, it's weird. And cats do it all the time. Freaky little things that they are. You wake up with kids and all of a sudden, you open your eyes and there's a pair of eyeballs. Even if that's your kid, you're startled. One, they're breathing in your face, but two, they're a lot closer than you expect. And three, they're watching you while you're sleeping, and that's incredibly vulnerable. And depending on how your kid is, that could be more scary than others. And so this is what happens. He shivers awake, and then he's startled at the sight of this woman who is laying there watching him sleep. And so he turned himself, and there was a woman lying at his feet. Okay, this is awkward, startling, weird. She wasn't there when I went to bed. I know, I checked. And he said, the first thing that popped into his mind, who are you? Because I know we all read that like, and he said, who are you? Okay, he may have spoken like that on a normal basis, but when you get woke up in the middle of the night and somebody's looking at you, it's a little more panicky. Who are you? It's dark, he can't really see. Put yourself in this guy's shoes. Well, he's not wearing any shoes, but put yourself in his place. So she answered, I am Ruth, your maidservant. Now, she probably did say it like that. She wasn't surprised by this at all. Take your maidservant under your wing, for you are a close relative. And the close relative there, that kinsman redeemer. So she's laying there, and she just says calmly. I mean, this is the script. She's worked this all out in her head. She has the advantage of preparation. I'm Ruth, your maidservant, the one that's been out in the field. You're a close relative. Would you take me under your wing? She has asked him, kind of invoked that idea of a kinsman redeemer, saying, would you fulfill that role for me? Now, Boaz, this is Ruth's plan, and Naomi's plan. Ruth carries it out flawlessly. Boaz agrees to Naomi's plan. And that's the good news here that he does. He says, blessed are you of the Lord. Now, I think at some point he recovers his composure and he begins speaking like normally not freaked out voice. But he says, blessed are you of the Lord, my daughter, for you have shown more kindness at the end than at the beginning. Now, that's kind of it's an odd expression. You've shown more kindness at the end, as in like right now, than you did at the beginning. And it's kind of odd to try to piece this together and try to get ourselves into Boaz's head and think about what he's thinking about. But key to me is the question she's asked. She said, would you bring me under your wing of protection? When Boaz approached Ruth in chapter 1, if you went back and looked, he said to her, as he was complimenting her, one of the things that he said was that you have brought yourself under the Lord's protection. And so there's a linguistic connection there between chapter 1 and chapter 3, this idea of being brought under the wing for protection. And so I think in Boaz's mind, that first kindness that she did was that kindness of voluntarily bringing yourself under God's wing of protection. That was a kindness. Now, the ramifications of that is that she was with Naomi, and she was there voluntarily, and she was taking care of Naomi, doing that voluntarily, and literally working like a slave in the field in order to provide. That was all wrapped up in that element of kindness. But he says, your kindness at the end is greater than your kindness at the beginning. And the kindness at the end, he at least tells us what that is, because he says, in that you did not go after young men, whether poor or rich. He said, you didn't chase down like the hottest bachelor you could find. You didn't like go on some stupid game show and see if you could do better. There was a lot of things that you didn't do that you could have done. And here's what we sense and see about Ruth that he kind of sensed and saw. Because it's unusual in this society, in this culture, that a woman would pick her husband. Now, today, it's not that unusual. You hear about women proposing to men, and fine, whatever roles, I don't care. However it gets it done, get it done. Fine. But, it would not be at all strange in our culture. But in this day and age, it was very unusual for a woman to have much, if any, input into whom she was going to marry. But Boaz indicates here, he said, you chose me, not one of the other young men, whether rich or poor, indicating that she really did have something of a choice. Because Ruth was a single woman, but she was also fatherless. She didn't have anybody who was actually out there trying to, matchmake for her. If it was going to get done, she was going to have to be the one that got it done. But Ruth had a couple things going for her. Ruth, best that we can tell, just by you read between the lines, Ruth had that exotic beauty thing working. Like Boaz walked out. If you remember, Boaz walked from Bethlehem out to his field, and he looks across the field, and he sees everybody that's there, and he goes, who's that one? Like, even from a distance, he was like, who's that one? Her clothes are different. Her skin looks different. She's got that exotic beauty thing going on. It was clear that his staff, that Boaz's staff, his managers and people who were out there knew exactly who's that one meant. They didn't even have to see who's that one, because they knew. She was attracting attention really just about everywhere that she went. One, she was, not from there, but the kind of the impression between the lines is that, she was attractive and exotic. She was industrious. Everybody saw that. She was a hard worker. I mean, you add, like a woman who's exotic and attractive and a hard worker and very capable, and suddenly her cred's going higher and higher and higher, and she really could just kind of walk out there and look at who's eligible, who's available, and just kind of pick the best one and say, I think I'll take him. It was like a buyer's market for her. It's a rare day in this culture, but she had it going on. And Boaz is like, wow, you chose me over else that you could have chosen. So he says in verse 11 then, and now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you request, for all the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman. She was virtuous on top of it. I mean, she had a lot going on. Now, it is true that I am a close relative. However, there is a relative closer than I. Remember, I said there was an order in which this had to happen. There are, whoever was closest had that role, and then it would just kind of disseminate out. And he's like, yeah, I am a close relative, but there is one guy who is closer in line to me. You know what that tells me? Boaz had given this a little bit of thought. Boaz knew who was up to bat first. He had given it enough thought. There had been enough attraction on his end that he'd stopped to think about how might this work? What might happen in this scenario? He knew right off the bat that though the right and the role of this kinsman redeemer could fall to him, it had not yet fallen to him. There was one who was closer than he was. I think it's interesting that he knew that right off. I think it's telling about where his mind was on the matter. So he says in verse 13, then, stay this night, and in the morning it shall be that if he will perform the duty of a close relative for you, good. Let him do it. But if he does not want to perform the duty for you, then I will perform the duty for you. As the Lord lives, lie down until morning. And so Boaz accepts this role of the kinsman redeemer, but more than that, Boaz accepts God's plan. Boaz trusts that the Lord knows what he's doing in putting in this security system for people, and he trusts that it will work out all right. He says, look, if this guy is willing, he's the one who has the right. He is the one who, under God's plan, comes first. If he's willing to do it, then that is fine with me. I've given it some thought, however. I mean, clearly, Boaz, there's an attractive element here. But if he's willing to do it, good. I trust in God's plan, both for you and for me, that this will be okay. And if not, even better. That's kind of in the Hebrew. But he trusted in the Lord's plan. However that played out, he was fine with it because it was God's system, and he trusted it, and he was fine. And so he tells her, just go back to sleep, or go to sleep at all, because she had been just staring at him. And so Ruth accepts Boaz's instructions. Verse 14, so she lay at his feet until morning, and she arose before one could recognize another. Then he said, do not let it be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. Now, nothing impure had happened here tonight. I mean, she uncovered his feet. It's gross, but it's not impure. That was the extent of what had happened. But what would it look like if somebody discovered her there? You know, you come rolling up and you're one of the servants, and all of a sudden, hey, there's a woman sleeping next to the boss. Where does your mind go just that fast? And both Ruth and Boaz were aware of this and very interested in not projecting that. It's an interesting thing. You know, we tell our kids, and I say it as well as you do, that it doesn't matter what people think. Can we be honest for a second? We're in church and just say that's not true? Because it does, doesn't it? Because if somebody thinks that you've been doing what they think you've been doing in this scenario, it doesn't matter how much you protest, and it doesn't matter how innocent you actually are. In their mind, you're guilty. Right? So sometimes it actually does matter. I mean, wisdom of age is knowing when it does and when it doesn't. But sometimes it actually does matter what other people think about you. And especially when there is a potential situation in which you could be viewed as having sinned when you did not. Wisdom says, I'm going to get out of here before somebody thinks something happened that didn't. Because why would you want your own good name besmirched for something you didn't do? And I find sometimes, and this is good for you kids, it's good for us as adults as well, I find sometimes we get ourselves into compromising situations where it would be easy for somebody to think the wrong thing. And on one hand, we say, you know what, I don't care what you think. But on the other hand, you better. Do you really want to have the appearance of evil clinging to you? And I think the answer is no. And so sometimes it really does matter what other people think, especially when somebody could think that you've compromised, you've sinned, even though you haven't. You don't want to give off that impression. So sometimes you go the extra mile just so that you don't have even the appearance of evil in your life. And so that's what they're doing here. And so he said, bring that shawl that is on you and hold it. See, she was still dressed. Bring that shawl that is on you and hold it. And when she held it, he measured 6 ephahs of barley and laid it on her. Yay! Now she had 6 ephahs of barley. How big a blessing was that? Okay, let's think. We talked about an ephah a couple weeks ago, remember? An ephah is about how big a thing? About 5 gallons, right? And an ephah weighs about how much? Anybody remember? I know it's like, who asked for a quiz? About 30 pounds. And he just laid 6 ephahs of barley on her. This was a heavy blessing. Literally. She's walking away with 180 pounds of barley on her back. So not only is Ruth exotic and good-looking and industrious, but she's strong as an ox. Because she's walking with 180 pounds on her shoulder. You go, girl. But He measured it onto her, and she went into the city. And so she remained as instructed, and then she receives from him this guarantee. Like, this is the down payment. I'm going to take care of you. Here's a whole bunch of food to prove I'm going to take care of you. And then we find Naomi's trust in security. That's in Roman numeral 3 if you're trying to keep track of where I am. Naomi's trust in security in the verses 16 through 18. So Ruth gets home. She came to her mother-in-law and said, "Is that you, my daughter?" Then she told her all that the man had done for her. And she said, this 6 ephahs of barley he gave me, for he said to me, do not go empty-handed to your mother-in-law. So she went very full-handed. Then she said, sit still, my daughter, until you know how the matter will turn out, for the man will not rest until he has concluded the matter this day. And so Naomi had a lot of trust in the fact that she was going to be secured. She trusted in God's plan. Ultimately, the security sought by Naomi and Ruth was not the security of a man. They sought the security of a system put in place by God to preserve both life and legacy. It wasn't that they were trusting in a man. It wasn't they were trusting in a husband. And that would belittle the lesson of Ruth chapter 3 to say, girls, go find a husband, he'll take care of you. He may not. And that wasn't their goal. That wasn't their aim. Sure, the husband may have been the vehicle, but their trust wasn't in Boaz, even as good and godly as a man as he appeared to be, as wealthy a man as he appeared to be. Their trust was in God. Their trust was in the system that God had put in place, and their trust was in that this would be okay. But the system only worked when God's people trusted him enough to obey the principles he put in place. Now, you don't know the rest of the story yet. Maybe you've read the book of Ruth. It's not very long, and you know that this worked out really, really well for her. But she didn't know what was coming. All she knew is she was trusting in God. And that was going to be enough. But it only worked, just like a security system. It only works when you do it. You have to buy it. You have to install it. You have to turn it on. You have to plug it in. You have to do all those things. You have to follow those rules in order to trust it. Same is true in the system that God put in. It only works when you follow the principles he laid out. But that's really the way it is in all of life, isn't it? God has given us in his word the principles that we need to live a secure life. But we have to trust his principles enough to obey them. You get that, don't you? We talk about it. We say, God's given it. In the Bible is everything that we need to live a secure life. Really? Are you sure? Because I know an awful lot of Christians whose life is an absolute walking disaster. Don't you? Forget unsaved people. Forget worldlings. Forget ungodly people. Forget all that. I know enough Christians whose life is an absolute disaster. But you know what I see in all of their lives? That if they've ever opened their Bible, they didn't stop long enough to see what the principles are that they should be living by. They didn't trust God's principles enough to live by. They're trusting in their own wisdom, in their own knowledge, in their own experience, and they're trying to live their life that way. You cannot blame God when it goes awry if you're not following what he told you to do. Right? Ladies, you get that? Your husband's lost. You told him to turn left. He turned right. It's on him, isn't it? You tell your kids to do A, they do B, and C happens. Yeah, well, we saw that coming. That's why we said do A. But you didn't trust me enough to follow what I told you to do. It's not my fault that you have consequences. And the same is true in our lives. God has given us all of the principles that we need to live a secure life. But we have to carry out those principles. We have to trust him enough to carry out those principles. Bottom line is this. There is an absolute correlation between trust and obedience. There's an absolute correlation between trust and obedience. We obey God because we trust Him, and when we disobey God, it only proves that we don't. Now, we would never say that, but our lives do, don't they? Sometimes our lives speak volumes that our tongue would never utter. Our disobedience. I know what the Bible says, but let me make you an ironclad guarantee. If you ever say that, whatever follows the word but is stupid. Can I be honest? I know what the Bible says, but just stop yourself right there, because whatever you're about to say is idiotic. Whatever you're about to do is dumb, and it's not going to get you what you think it will. I keep saying, I love that sign. One of these days, you're going to go by the church, and you're going to see it right out here. Everything does happen for a reason, but sometimes the reason is you're stupid and make bad decisions. That's a reason. Now, the good news is it's too long to actually fit on our sign. But there's an absolute correlation between trust and obedience. We obey God because we trust Him, and when we disobey God, all we're proving with our lives is that we do not trust Him. That has huge consequences for our spiritual life. That has huge consequences for our physical life, and it is as practical as anything gets. I mean, it bears out in every area of your life. It's an absolute correlation. Here's one. How many of you trust your driving ability more than the government's ability to calculate a safe driving speed? Everybody in the state of Massachusetts. You ever found yourself going, I wondered this one time, driving along. You know, I think the people who set the speed limits decided what the safe driving speed is and then cut it by 15. I think driving 40 in a 25 is usually safe. I think driving 25 in a 10 is safe. I think driving, 80 in a 65? Yeah, is safe. 80 miles an hour. Yeah, you drive 80 miles an hour slow lane, everybody in this state's going to pass you. Right? So I trust my driving ability more than I trust the government's ability to decide what's a safe driving speed. My disobedience proves that I do not trust them. And I'm not saying you should trust the government on anything. But I'm just saying it bears out. Absolute correlation between trust and obedience. If you trust yourself more than your parents, you will not obey them. Right, kids? Thank you. By the way, that's kind of the plot of every kid's show on every kid's channel in America today. My parents are idiots. I can't trust them. I got to figure this out myself. Should we dump Disney Channel? Probably. But kids, guess what? When you disobey your parents, all you're proving is you don't trust them. I would never say that. You do all the time, trust me. Because half of you in this room are mine. It's not really that bad, but we're getting there. Since there's an absolute correlation between trust and obedience, we can use our disobedience to see what and whom we do trust. And once we make that identification, then we can adjust our behavior accordingly. If you say, wow, I'm disobeying God, that says I don't trust God, but I do trust God. Guess what that means you need to do? Change your behavior. Or change your statement. Be consistent. Decide and advertise. I don't trust God. I'm just going to do it my way. I like Frank Sinatra. I'm going to do it my way. But use that obedience or disobedience as a way to sense whether you do or do not trust God. And if you really do trust Him, then when you see it, fix it. Because His plan is better. Father, we thank you for today. I thank you for this chapter. Lord, it's fascinating. It's interesting. There's a lot here. But at the end of the day, it comes down to something that's very basic to us, basic for us, and that is trusting you and obeying you. Help us to see the correlation that's there. Father, help us, more importantly, for our own lives, to see when and where we're disobedient. And help us actually take a moment to think about it. I know this is what God said, but. And if we truly don't trust you, help us to at least be honest about that. You know we're lying. We may as well admit it. Help us to be consistent. But help us to be consistently trusting you and obeying you, because your system is really set up for our security if we'll just trust it. Thank you, Father, for the reminder. Help us to live it. In Jesus' good name.